12-year-old boy named Alex Turner saved a plane from crashing when both pilots lost consciousness. Just 24 hours later, he received a shocking invitation from the president. What he did while flying the plane left everyone in complete shock. It was on a Tuesday morning when the Turner family decided to travel back home after their long-awaited family vacation. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden hue over the airport tarmac as travelers bustled around, dragging suitcases and murmuring last-minute goodbyes. Alex Turner, a bright-eyed 12-year-old, walked confidently between his parents, Daniel and Emma, clutching a small toy plane in his hands. His gaze darted toward the massive aircraft parked outside the terminal windows, his eyes lighting up with fascination. Alex was the only child of his parents, a gift they cherished deeply. He was a brilliant kid, unusually mature for his age, with a mind that seemed to process things faster than most adults. While other kids were busy playing video games and watching cartoons, Alex had spent hours studying flight manuals, poring over aviation videos, and practicing on a high-end flight simulator his father had reluctantly bought him after months of begging. Flying wasn't just a hobby for Alex, it was his obsession. Daniel and Emma had always encouraged Alex's passion, but sometimes worried about the intensity of it. He spoke about aircraft types, engine models, and aerodynamics with the fluency of an experienced pilot. Even his teachers at school often remarked that Alex was destined for a future in the skies. But Daniel had once confided to Emma that he sometimes wished Alex would spend more time being a regular kid, riding bikes, playing ball, getting dirty in the mud. Emma had smiled and told him Alex's mind was made for greater things. As they made their way through the crowded terminal, Alex's excitement was palpable. His gaze locked onto the towering jetliner they were about to board, a sleek Boeing 747 with its distinctive humpback design. Alex recognized the model immediately and began rattling off technical details to his father. "Did you know this plane's maximum takeoff weight is over 800,000 pounds?" Alex said, his eyes glinting with excitement. "It can cruise at around 570 miles per hour. Daniel smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "You're a walking aviation encyclopedia, buddy." Alex grinned proudly. As they stepped onto the plane, a friendly flight attendant named Olivia welcomed them with a bright smile. "Good morning. Welcome aboard," she chirped, leaning down slightly to meet Alex's eye level. Alex's eyes immediately swept over her uniform, noticing the subtle gold stripes on her shoulder. "You're the head flight attendant, right?" he asked confidently. Olivia's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "That's right. How'd you know?" Alex shrugged. "Two stripes on the uniform means senior status. You've probably been flying for at least 5 years." Olivia let out a laugh, glancing at Daniel and Emma. "Well, aren't you a sharp one?" Alex beamed. "I'm going to be a pilot one day," he declared. "I have no doubt about that," Olivia said with a wink. "Want to guess what kind of plane you're on today?" Alex's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he glanced at the overhead compartments and the seating arrangement. "It's a Boeing 747-8, he replied confidently. "Based on the interior configuration, it's the latest model." Olivia's mouth fell open. "Wow," she whispered. "Most pilots don't even know the interiors that well." Emma smiled politely, but Daniel's expression showed a trace of concern. Alex had always been a little too intense when it came to airplanes. He had memorized flight manuals, practiced simulated takeoffs and landings hundreds of times, and even learned emergency protocols. Daniel sometimes worried about how much time Alex spent in the world of aviation, as if he lived more in the sky than on the ground. They found their seats, row 15, middle section. Alex sat between his parents, still clutching his toy plane. His eyes scanned the cabin, absorbing every detail, the angle of the wing flaps, the sound of the engines spooling up, and the precise order in which the flight attendants were conducting their safety checks. "You nervous, buddy?" Daniel asked as he buckled his seatbelt. Alex shook his head. "Nope. The 747 has one of the safest flight records in the world. Besides, I know what to do if anything goes wrong." Daniel chuckled. "Let's hope you won't need to test that knowledge today." As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, Alex pressed his face against the window. His heart raced as the engines roared to life. He knew the General Electric GNX engines under the wings produced 66,500 pounds of thrust each, enough to lift the massive aircraft off the ground with breathtaking speed. The plane accelerated down the runway, and Alex's heart thumped in time with the rhythm of the wheels against the tarmac. With a sudden powerful surge, the nose lifted, and the plane soared into the sky. Alex's eyes sparkled with excitement as the ground fell away beneath them. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Olivia passed by again, offering drinks and snacks. Alex struck up another conversation with her. "Did you know that the 747-8 has a wingspan of 224 feet and 7 inches?" he asked. Olivia smiled. "You're making me look bad, Alex." Daniel shook his head with a laugh. "He's been studying planes since he could talk." "Well, it sounds like he's ready to fly one," Olivia joked. Alex's eyes darkened with seriousness. "I could if I had to." Olivia's smile faltered slightly as she studied Alex's face. There was no hint of arrogance in his tone, only quiet certainty. Daniel leaned toward Alex. "Maybe one day you'll be flying us to Hawaii for vacation." Alex smiled faintly. "Maybe sooner than you think." Emma's smile faded slightly. There was something about the way Alex said it, an eerie kind of confidence that didn't quite fit a 12-year-old. But before she could dwell on it, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. We're looking at a smooth flight today with clear skies all the way to New York." Alex closed his eyes, letting the soft hum of the engines fill his ears. He imagined himself in the cockpit, hands on the yoke, calmly guiding the massive plane through the clouds. He knew the controls by heart, the thrust levers, the altitude indicator, the flap settings. He imagined adjusting for turbulence, compensating for crosswinds, and perfectly aligning the plane for a textbook landing. The plane rocked slightly as it passed through a pocket of turbulence. Passengers murmured nervously, but Alex remained calm. He knew it was normal. He could even estimate the wind speed just by the rhythm of the jolts. Olivia passed by again, smiling at Alex. "You okay?" Alex nodded. "This plane can handle it." Olivia laughed. "You're a natural." Emma leaned over, brushing Alex's hair back. "You know, maybe it wouldn't hurt to try a sport or hobby that doesn't involve planes." Alex's expression darkened slightly. "This is what I love." Daniel smiled, placing an arm around his son. "We know, buddy, and we're proud of you." Alex's gaze wandered back to the window, watching the clouds drift by beneath the wing. He imagined himself sitting in the cockpit, surrounded by buttons and dials, guiding the plane through the sky with absolute control. Suddenly, the plane jolted violently. The overhead bins rattled, and the cabin lights flickered. Passengers gasped as the plane began to tilt slightly. Olivia appeared from the galley, her face pale. She hurried toward the cockpit, but stopped abruptly when the captain's strained voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain seated." Alex's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. He heard the change in the engine pitch. He saw the flight attendants exchanging worried glances. The plane trembled again, more violently this time. A baby began crying in the back row. Daniel and Emma sat upright, gripping their seatbelts. Alex's gaze darkened with understanding. He knew the sound of a failing engine. He knew the signs of hydraulic pressure loss. He knew this was more than just turbulence. They were mid-air when the journey took a wild turn, and Alex knew exactly what was happening. It happened so fast. One moment the plane was cruising smoothly through the soft cotton clouds at 30,000 feet. The hum of the engines was steady, and passengers were settling into the rhythm of a long flight. Alex Turner sat between his parents, Daniel and Emma, still clutching his toy plane. His eyes remained fixed on the window, watching the endless stretch of sky beyond the wingtip. He had been watching the wing flaps adjust for hours, calculating speed and wind pressure in his head just for fun. Daniel nudged his son's arm. "What's our altitude, Captain Turner?" 30,000 feet, Alex replied without hesitation. "We're cruising at about 540 miles per hour." Daniel laughed. "One day, buddy, one day." "Maybe sooner than you think," Alex replied with a small smile. And then it happened. A violent jolt rocked the aircraft. A loud bang reverberated through the cabin. The plane pitched sharply to the left, sending loose items tumbling down the aisles. Passengers gasped and clutched their armrests. Overhead bins rattled, and some of them popped open, spilling bags into the aisle. "What the hell was that?" Daniel exclaimed, his hand instinctively gripping Alex's shoulder. Before anyone could gather their thoughts, another jolt shook the plane, harder this time. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a mechanical hiss. The cabin lights flickered and dimmed, casting an eerie glow over the wide-eyed faces of the passengers. A baby's wail broke through the stunned silence, and then the chaos erupted. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and uneven. "We are experiencing some..." And then the line went dead. Passengers started shouting. A woman screamed from the back of the plane. Flight attendants scrambled down the aisles, trying to calm people down. Alex's heart hammered in his chest as he felt the plane's nose dip slightly. The engines roared unevenly beneath them, and he knew exactly what was happening. The plane was losing altitude. Fast. Olivia, the head flight attendant, rushed toward the cockpit, her face pale. Alex's gaze followed her, sharp and calculating. He could feel the change in the cabin pressure, the subtle shift in the engine's tone. This wasn't turbulence. This was a system failure. The call to action. A minute later, Olivia reappeared from the cockpit. Her face was ashen, her hands shaking as she clutched the back of a seat to steady herself. "Everyone, please remain calm," she called out. Her voice was high-pitched with barely restrained panic. She hurried toward the other flight attendants, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Alex could see the fear in their eyes. Alex unbuckled his seatbelt. Emma grabbed his arm. "Alex, stay seated." He ignored her. His eyes were locked on Olivia. Something was wrong, badly wrong. He slipped out of his seat and approached her. "What's happening?" Alex asked. His voice was calm, too calm for a 12-year-old. Olivia looked down at him, startled. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. She hesitated. "Tell me," Alex said more firmly. Olivia bit her lip. "The captain suffered a heart attack," she whispered. "And the co-pilot, he's unconscious." Alex's blood ran cold. "Who's flying the plane?" Olivia's silence was his answer. Passengers started to panic. A man shouted something about needing a doctor. Another woman was clutching a rosary, her lips moving in frantic prayer. A young boy was crying into his mother's shoulder. Daniel reached for Alex. "Come back here, Alex." Alex didn't move. His mind was already working through the situation. He knew what needed to be done, but the question was, would they let him? "I can help," Alex said. Olivia's eyes widened. "Alex, this isn't a game. This is a..." "I know," Alex cut in. His voice was steady. "I've studied flight controls. I know how to fly a 747. "You're 12, Olivia said, her voice breaking. Alex took a deep breath. "And I'm the only person on this plane who knows how to handle this aircraft." Olivia's breath hitched. She studied Alex's face, the quiet confidence, the steady gaze, the complete absence of fear. "He's kidding, right?" another flight attendant whispered. Alex's jaw tightened. He stepped toward Olivia. "We are losing altitude right now. The autopilot is trying to correct the dive, but if the hydraulic system is compromised, it won't hold. You need to manually adjust the angle of attack and throttle control." Olivia stared at him like he had grown a second head. How do you know that?" "I study flight manuals," Alex said. "I've practiced hundreds of simulations. I know how to fly this plane." Daniel stepped forward. "Alex, no!" His face was pale. "This is insane." Alex's expression hardened. "Do you have a better idea?" Olivia hesitated for half a second, then she nodded. "Follow me," she said. Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing Alex's wrist. "Alex, no!" Alex turned toward his father, his eyes dark with quiet certainty. "Dad, I can do this." Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He had never seen his son look so certain of anything in his life. "Go," Emma whispered, tears in her eyes. "Save us." Alex followed Olivia toward the cockpit. His heart hammered in his chest, but his mind was sharp and clear. He had imagined this scenario hundreds of times in his head. Now, it was real. Olivia opened the cockpit door. The captain was slumped in his seat, his face pale and drenched in sweat. The co-pilot was unconscious, his head resting awkwardly against the control panel. Alarm lights were flashing across the dashboard. The control yoke trembled under the pressure of the dive. Alex slid into the captain's seat, his hands wrapped around the yoke. He adjusted the seat height until his feet could reach the pedals. His fingers skimmed the familiar dials and switches. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Thrust control first." Alex, are you sure? Olivia started. Alex cut her off. If we lose more altitude, the pressure drop will tear the fuselage apart. He nudged the throttle and adjusted the yoke angle. The plane shuddered violently. Alex gritted his teeth and adjusted the elevator trim. The engines groaned as Alex corrected the tilt. The plane's nose began to lift slowly. The descent slowed. A burst of static came over the radio. A voice crackled through. Flight 237, this is air traffic control. We've been tracking your distress signal. Please respond. Alex leaned toward the radio. This is Alex Turner, acting captain. We're experiencing a medical emergency and system failure. I have control of the aircraft. The radio was silent for a moment. Alex Turner, age? Alex hesitated. 12. Jesus Christ, the controller muttered. Okay, Alex, we'll walk you through this. Alex exhaled, his hands steadied on the controls. Don't worry, he said. I've got this. Daniel and Emma sat frozen in their seats as the plane slowly stabilized. Emma's hand was over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Daniel's heart hammered painfully in his chest. Alex's eyes were focused, steady. His hands moved across the control panel with precision, guided by years of study and instinct. He had always dreamed of flying, but he had never imagined it would happen like this. 30,000 feet in the air, in the face of chaos and fear, Alex Turner had become a pilot. Alex's hands tightened around the yoke. His arm strained as he pulled it back ever so slightly. The plane resisted at first, groaning under the pressure of the dive. Come on, Alex whispered to himself. His fingers adjusted the trim on the control panel. The yoke trembled under his hands. Sweat dripped down the side of his face. Easy, easy, the voice on the radio coached. Not too much or you'll stall. Alex took a shaky breath and held the yoke steady. The plane's nose started to rise slowly, almost reluctantly, but it was enough. The violent descent began to ease. The red warning lights flickered but didn't go out. I think I've got it, Alex said, more to himself than the radio. You're doing great, Alex, the controller replied. Now we need to fix your altitude. You're at 20,000 feet and falling. Set the altimeter to 30,000 and hold your climb angle at 5 degrees, the controller instructed. Alex's fingers danced over the dials with unsettling precision. His eyes darted between the instruments, calculating speed, pressure, and angle in his head. His breath steadied as the aircraft responded to his touch. He adjusted the throttle, balancing the power on both engines. The plane's ascent leveled out. In the cabin, a tense hush had fallen over the passengers. Faces were pale, eyes wide. Some passengers were clutching their armrests, others holding hands or praying quietly. Daniel and Emma sat frozen in their seats. Daniel's knuckles were white as he gripped the armrest. Emma's hands were clasped over her mouth, tears streaking down her face. "Oh my God," Daniel whispered, his eyes fixed on the cockpit door. "He's really doing it." Olivia stood near the front, her hand clutching the back of a seat. She watched Alex through the narrow gap in the cockpit door, barely able to comprehend what she was seeing. "Alex," the air traffic controller's voice returned, "you've stabilized the plane. Now you need to maintain altitude and adjust your heading. Can you see the navigation screen?" Alex's eyes flicked toward the panel. His fingers tapped the key, and the screen lit up with a bright green line showing their flight path. "Got it," Alex said. "Good. Adjust your heading to 210 and hold it there." Alex's hands moved swiftly over the controls, adjusting the rudder and stabilizers. His breathing slowed, his eyes sharpened. The plane straightened out. The vibrations eased. The cabin grew eerily quiet as passengers realized that the sensation of freefall had stopped. The engines were steady. The plane was no longer plummeting. A collective sigh of relief spread through the cabin. A woman sobbed quietly into her hands. A man murmured a prayer under his breath. Olivia leaned into the cockpit. "Alex," she whispered, "how are you doing this?" Alex's jaw tightened. His hands still trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "I've read every commercial flight manual since I was 6, he said simply. "I've trained on flight simulators for years." Olivia shook her head in disbelief. "But this is real." "I know," Alex said. He exhaled slowly, his grip on the yoke steadying. "That's why I can't mess up." "Alex," the controller's voice came back. "We're going to guide you toward a nearby runway for an emergency landing, but you'll need to execute the approach manually." Alex's heart skipped. "I can do it," he said without hesitation. Daniel's voice broke through the quiet. "Alex!" Alex turned his head. His father's eyes were filled with fear and something else, pride. "We believe in you, son," Daniel said, his voice thick. Alex turned back toward the controls, his eyes sharp and clear. His hands stopped shaking. Alex's heart hammered in his chest as the runway came into view. The control tower's voice crackled over the headset. "Flight 237, you're on final approach. Winds at 12 knots, slight crosswind from the left. Adjust flaps to 30 degrees. Alex's hands were steady as they glided over the control panel. He adjusted the flaps with a quick flick of his fingers. His eyes were focused and tense, tracking every indicator on the screen. The plane's descent was slightly uneven. A sharp tremor ran through the fuselage. "Alex," the calm voice from the tower returned. "Your landing gear is showing an error. Can you confirm?" Alex's eyes darted to the panel. A red light flashed ominously. His chest tightened. "The gear isn't down," Alex said, his voice even despite the growing pressure. The controller's voice sharpened. "All right, we need to troubleshoot. You're too close to abort the landing. Manual override, lever to your left." Alex's hand shot to the lever. He pulled. A loud clunk sounded from beneath the aircraft, but the red light stayed on. "Still no gear," Alex said, his voice tightening. In the cabin, passengers were holding hands, eyes squeezed shut. Alex's mother, Emma, sat rigid, tears running silently down her cheeks. His father, Daniel, gripped her hand. Across the aisle, Olivia was kneeling, whispering prayers under her breath. "Oh, God," Daniel muttered. He pressed his forehead to Emma's hand. "He's just a kid." Olivia leaned toward them, her eyes glassy but full of quiet strength. She squeezed Daniel's arm. "He's not just a kid," she said softly. "He's your son. He can do this." Alex's jaw tightened. His grip on the yoke was firm. His breath slowed. "Alex," the controller's voice returned, "you're at 500 feet. If the gear's not down, you'll have to do a belly landing." "I've got this," Alex said, his voice sharp. 300 feet. The runway rushed toward them, stretching wide beneath the nose of the aircraft. Alex's eyes flicked toward the malfunctioning gear light. His mind raced. 200 feet. Alex's breath slowed. He adjusted the pitch slightly, feeling the resistance in the yoke. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm. 100 feet. Alex pulled back slightly on the yoke, his muscles straining. He reached over with his left hand and adjusted the trim. The plane steadied. 50 feet. Alex exhaled and whispered, "Come on." The wheels touched down with a bone-rattling bounce. The fuselage groaned as the plane rocked violently from side to side. Alex's knuckles whitened as he fought the yoke, steadying the nose. The plane's nose threatened to dip, a dangerous tilt that could cause the aircraft to flip, but Alex's instincts kicked in. He adjusted the rudder and eased the throttle, bringing the plane level. The wheels screeched as the rubber burned against the asphalt. The engines roared, the reverse thrusters kicking in. The plane's momentum fought back, then slowed. The nose tipped slightly, then steadied, and then the plane stopped. For a long, breathless moment, there was nothing but silence. Alex's eyes were wide, his chest heaving. His hands were still locked on the yoke. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then someone screamed, and suddenly the cabin erupted into chaos. But this time, it was joyful. Passengers clapped and cheered, some crying openly. A man near the back shouted, "He did it!" Alex's arms fell away from the yokes as his head sank against the back of the seat. His chest heaved as the tension slowly released from his body. His face was pale, streaked with sweat. The cockpit door burst open. His father stumbled in first, his face pale and stunned. "Alex," Daniel's voice was soft. Alex's head lifted slowly. His eyes were wide, dazed. "Dad." Daniel surged forward and pulled Alex into a tight embrace. His hand cupped the back of Alex's head, his shoulders shaking. "You saved us," Michael whispered. "My God, son, you saved us." Alex's breath hitched as his father held him. His mother's arms suddenly wrapped around both of them, her face buried in Alex's shoulder. "I was so scared," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Alex, I thought... Alex's breath steadied as he whispered, "I had to." Olivia appeared at the door, tears in her eyes. "Alex," she said softly, "the tower wants to speak to you." Alex gently pulled away from his parents and touched the headset. "This is Alex," he said. "Alex," the voice from the tower replied, full of relief and admiration. "Welcome back to solid ground, Captain." Alex's mouth curled into a tired smile. He rubbed a hand over his eyes. "Did I pass?" The controller laughed. "Kid, you just made history." As Alex stood shakily from the pilot's seat, Olivia handed him a bottle of water. "Alex," she said, her eyes shining, "you're incredible." Alex shrugged. "I've read a lot of flight manuals." Olivia smiled. "I think it's time you start writing them." Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, flashing red and blue lights cutting through the cabin windows. Rescue personnel began moving through the aisles, checking on passengers. Alex followed his parents out of the cockpit. Passengers turned toward him as he emerged. A wave of applause erupted. People stood, tears in their eyes. A man in first class started to chant, "Alex! Alex! Alex!" Alex's face flushed. He ducked his head, but his father's hand on his shoulder steadied him. Daniel leaned down and said, "Take it in, son. You earned it." Alex looked around at the cheering passengers, the grateful faces, and the hands reaching toward him in thanks. His lips curved into a soft smile. "I guess I did," he whispered. It was a bright afternoon, sunlight streaming through the tall, elegant windows of the White House's East Room. The soft murmur of the crowd stilled as the heavy double doors swung open and Alex Turner walked in with his parents by his side. His small hand gripped his mother's as they approached the grand stage. His father's steady hand rested on his shoulder. The President of the United States stood at the center of the stage, dressed sharply in a dark suit and crisp white shirt. His warm smile softened the formal atmosphere as Alex climbed the steps toward him. The room was packed with government officials, military officers, and members of the press, all eyes fixed on the 12-year-old boy who had saved hundreds of lives just a day before. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained calm. He stood before the president, his hands clasped at his sides as the president stepped forward. The president's eyes held quiet admiration as he lifted a velvet-lined box and opened it. Inside, a gleaming gold medal rested on its silk cushion. "Alex Turner," the president began, his voice carrying across the room, "is not just a hero. He is a symbol of courage, intelligence, and calm under pressure." Alex's breath caught. He lifted his gaze to meet the president's eyes. "What Alex accomplished in the skies yesterday was nothing short of extraordinary," the president continued. "When the flight crew became incapacitated, Alex stepped forward. A 12-year-old boy with no formal training took control of an aircraft at 30,000 feet and brought it safely to the ground, saving every single person on board." Alex's mother, Emma, pressed a tissue to her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks as she clutched Daniel's hand tightly. Daniel's other hand remained steady on Alex's shoulder. His father's face was proud, but tight with emotion. "And he did it with focus, courage, and extraordinary skill," the president said. He turned toward Alex, his smile widening. "Alex, you are an inspiration to this country and to the world." The president reached down and carefully lifted the medal from the box. Alex stood frozen as the heavy gold weight settled around his neck. He lifted his hand to touch the medal, feeling its cool surface against his fingertips. The room erupted into applause. The sound washed over him like a wave, loud and relentless. People stood, senators, generals, dignitaries, all rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Alex's cheeks burned. He glanced over his shoulder to where his mother and father stood. His father gave him a small nod. His mother smiled through her tears. The president lifted a hand, and the applause softened. He turned toward Alex again. "But that's not all," the president said. "Alex, your bravery and composure deserve more than just our thanks." Alex's eyes widened as the president reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "The government of the United States would like to present you with a $500,000 reward for your bravery." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Alex's mouth fell open. He turned toward his parents, but his father's stunned expression told him he had heard correctly. "And," the president continued, "we would also like to offer you a full scholarship to any aeronautical school of your choice." The crowd erupted into cheers once again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Photographers leaned forward to snap shots of the boy standing in wide-eyed disbelief. Alex's mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father's hand tightened on his shoulder. Alex stood motionless, his mind whirling. The president crouched down slightly so he was eye level with Alex. "You've got the makings of a great pilot, son," he said, his voice softer. "And we want to make sure you have every opportunity to reach that potential." Alex's lips parted. He searched for the right words, but all he could manage was a quiet, breathless, "Thank you." The president smiled and straightened. "You've earned it." Alex's father stepped forward and pulled Alex into a fierce hug. His mother followed, wrapping her arms around both of them. "I'm so proud of you," his father whispered. "I'm just glad everyone's safe," Alex said quietly. The president smiled at the tender moment. He stepped back as Alex's family embraced him tightly. As the applause continued, Alex finally let himself smile. His heart swelled with warmth. For the first time since stepping into the cockpit, the weight of everything began to lift. He had done it. He had saved them all, and now the sky was calling his name. Months later, the sky stretched wide and endless above the private runway. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the tarmac as Alex Turner stood at the edge of the runway, his silhouette sharp against the bright horizon. His crisp pilot's uniform, navy blue with gold stripes on the sleeves, fit him perfectly, a symbol of how far he had come. Alex took a steady breath, adjusting the brim of his cap. His parents stood a few feet away, watching him with quiet admiration. His father's arm was wrapped around his mother's shoulders, her eyes glistening with tears of pride. Alex turned toward the flight simulator, a state-of-the-art machine positioned at the edge of the training facility. His instructor, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, leaned casually against the side of the simulator. "You ready?" the instructor asked, his voice laced with quiet confidence. Alex's lips curled into a small smile. He stepped up to the simulator, his polished shoes clicking against the metal floor. His hands slid onto the controls, steady and confident. The hum of the simulator powered up beneath his fingertips, vibrating softly. "Let's see what you've got, Captain," the instructor said, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Alex's gaze sharpened as he focused on the virtual runway stretching before him. His hands moved with natural ease over the controls as the simulator responded smoothly to his touch. From the sidelines, his mother's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. His father's proud smile deepened. Alex's heart surged with a quiet thrill as the simulated aircraft lifted smoothly into the virtual sky. The screen faded to black, the powerful roar of an engine echoing through the hangar. Alex Turner was no longer just the boy who saved a plane. He was becoming the pilot he was always meant to be. Alex's incredible story of bravery and determination shows how passion and dedication can prepare us for life's unexpected challenges. From the terrifying moments at 30,000 feet to being honored by the president and stepping into his future as a pilot, Alex's journey reminds us that extraordinary things are possible even from the most unlikely heroes. His parents' journey, from worrying about their son's intense aviation obsession to witnessing how that very passion saved hundreds of lives, teaches us that sometimes what makes a child different is exactly what makes them special. Alex's story will continue to inspire generations of young dreamers who dare to reach for the skies. Thank you for watching. Please rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10. Did it keep you on the edge of your seat? We're looking forward to seeing your ratings and hearing your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for more exciting content.